Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, each time we gather up some source material to really get into what makes it tick. And today, today we have something really complex, provocative, definitely. It's this extensive exploration of theory, a pretty wild one, about a secret cult and their alleged plot for, well, global control. It draws on some heavy themes, finance, power, history, and some, like, say, very controversial claims about certain groups.
Oh, absolutely. This material presents a, let's call it an audacious and challenging perspective on world events. It posits this long-term hidden conspiracy driving history, driving societal change. And our mission here, just to be crystal clear for everyone listening, is to impartially examine the claims made within this source material. We need to understand precisely what it alleges, how it structures its arguments, the specific details it uses, all without endorsing or, refuting the truth or validity of any of it. We're simply exploring the text itself.
It's exactly. Think of this as a guided tour, but strictly through the source's claims. We're going to try and peel back the layers of what this specific text is alleging.
Yeah.
Who is this alleged group? What are their huge, like, multi-generational goals supposed to be? And what are the intricate, sometimes really disturbing methods the source claims they use to achieve? Well, global tyranny.
Yeah.
It's dense material, it's undeniably controversial, and it asks these fundamental questions about how the world really works. But always according to the narrative presented in this particular source.
Right. And for you, our listener, this deep dive is entirely about understanding the claims presented in the source material. That's the focus. Why does this material even exist? What specific ideas is it trying to get across about power, history, society? And maybe what precise details or connections within the text itself might surprise you or make you think differently about the narrative it presents, but purely from the perspective of analyzing the source. We're looking at the blueprint as drawn by this text.
All right, let's stop circling it then. Let's jump right into the heart of what this source tells us. Let's unpack this and see what the source actually alleges. Okay, so let's kick things off at the very beginning, according to this narrative. Who is the central player in this whole alleged conspiracy? This group it keeps calling the Illuminati. And what does this text claim their ultimate master plan really is?
Okay, the source identifies the Illuminati, straight up, as a satanic cult. It claims this group was specifically started around 1770, and interestingly, not by just one person, but by a syndicate, a group of bankers. The source names Mayor Rothschild as the leader of this syndicate. And it suggests others were involved too, financiers like Daniel Itzig, Friedlander, the Goldsmiths, Moses Makow. It actually references another work, Edith Starr Miller's Occult Theocracy, as a source for that specific list of names in the syndicate.
Wow, okay, so right from the get-go, around 1770, the source ties this group directly, fundamentally, to finance and banking.
Precisely. That connection, that link to banking and financial power, it's absolutely fundamental. It underpins the source's entire argument about how this alleged conspiracy operates. And crucially, the source links their core ideology, which it calls Illuminism. It links that directly to the Jewish Kabbalah.
Okay, the Kabbalah. How does the source interpret the Kabbalah in this context? Because that sounds like a major claim.
It is, and the source portrays the Kabbalah here quite negatively. It claims it preaches a philosophy where man, or specifically, as interpreted and supposedly applied by this alleged banking syndicate, can essentially usurp the place of God. It argues that this particular interpretation of Kabbalah leads them to believe that these individuals, can redefine truth itself, redefine it according to their own self-interest, their desire for power. And the source frames this interpretation of Kabbalah as the basis for what it explicitly calls a cult of sex worship.
A cult of sex worship based on Kabbalah.
That's the claim. The source even provides examples, according to its interpretation, of how certain Kabbalistic ideas about sex and specific symbols, like the dot within a circle, how those relate to this alleged cult's practices and core beliefs. And it deliberately sets up this stark contrast. It contrasts this alleged Kabbalistic foundation with what it refers to as the civilizing effect Christ's gospel of love has had on society. So right from the start, it's framing this as a kind of spiritual battle.
Wow. Okay, that's an incredibly strong claim right there about their supposed foundational beliefs and how the source sees them. So based on this alleged ideology, what are the big picture goals? What does the source attribute to the Illuminati? What exactly are they trying to achieve with this hidden plot?
Well, the source lays out a whole series of really sweeping and, frankly, destructive goals, and it often links them explicitly, repeatedly, to communism and this concept of a new world order. The source lists these goals almost like a manifesto of destruction aimed at dismantling pretty much all existing structures of society and identity. First, the source claims their goal is the destruction of Christianity and also monarchies. These are presented as traditional sources of spiritual and political authority that need to go. Second, the abolition of nation-states. The source argues they push for this in favor of world government, or what it calls internationalism, basically dissolving national sovereignty.
So, getting rid of countries as we know them.
That's the claim. Third, the source alleges they aim for the abolition of family ties and traditional marriage. And it claims this is pursued specifically by promoting homosexuality and promiscuity, arguing this is designed to weaken the fundamental unit of society. Fourth goal, according to the source, the end of inheritance and private property. It aligns this goal directly with communist ideology.
Okay, classic communist points there, allegedly co-opted.
Right. And finally, the source claims they seek the suppression of any form of collective identity, whether that's national identity, religious, racial, even familial identity, all supposedly suppressed in what the source sarcastically calls the spurious name of universal human brotherhood, i.e. diversity. The source frames this as a tactic to basically isolate individuals, make them rootless, and erase any group solidarity that might resist their plan.
So it really paints a picture of a systematic effort. A plan to completely restructure, or maybe more accurately, dismantle traditional society. Dismantle nations, families, identity itself, and all under the guise of other movements or concepts.
Yes, that is precisely the picture the source paints. It claims their ultimate overarching goal. The logical endpoint of all these specific aims is to, quote, degrade and enslave humanity mentally and spiritually, if not physically. That's the source's language. It describes this group's alleged influence as being like a cancer that extends throughout society, claiming it has subverted a vast array of organizations, even seemingly benevolent ones like charities, professional groups, and crucially, most major political movements right across the spectrum.
So the source claims they're behind everything from, say, Zionism and communism on one hand to fascism and liberalism on the other. That covers pretty much everything.
According to the source, yes. It explicitly lists movements like Zionism, communism, socialism, liberalism, neoconservatism, and fascism, all as being subverted or controlled by this single group. The source claims this pervasive hidden influence is why society often seems to be run by figures it describes with some pretty chilling language. It refers to them as soulless men with pinched faces who spout platitudes and exude evil.
That image, it's really one of a hidden hand, isn't it? Guiding everything, manipulating all these different groups and ideologies, even ones that seem like they're fighting each other, all towards this single dark end goal, this alleged global tyranny. And the source mentioning those soulless men with pinched faces, it's not just a description. It implies these are actual agents, right? Corrupted or controlled people placed in power.
Yes, it ties this directly back to the source's claim about manipulating knowledge, manipulating truth itself. The source alleges that this group actively tells us, promotes the idea that truth is unknowable, subjective. It frames this as a deliberate attempt to reshape truth itself according to self-interest. Which, again, it links back to its interpretation of the Kabbalah, this idea of man usurping God's place. The source even uses this anecdote, maybe apocryphal, about an Orthodox Jew interviewing someone for a job, asks him, what's 2 + 2? And the applicant says, whatever you want it to be, and he gets the job. The source uses this to illustrate this alleged approach to objective truth in the context of the New World Order they're supposedly building. It's presented as fundamental to their control, undermine reality itself.
Okay, so we've established who the source claims this group is, their alleged origins, ideology, and this truly dark vision for humanity. The source then pivots, right? It details how this seemingly impossible plot is allegedly executed, and the first mechanism it describes seems tied fundamentally to control the control of money itself. How does the source claim this group, the Illuminati, manages to exert this kind of pervasive control over society? What are the alleged mechanisms?
Right. A primary mechanism described in the source, maybe the most central one to its economic argument, is the control of money creation, the whole financial system. The source points to the historical origin of central banks. It cites specific examples. The Bank of England, founded 1694, the Bank of France in 1800, the German Reichsbank in 1871. It claims these were established not as government bodies, but as private corporations. And even though the Bank of England was later nationalized, at least in name, in 1946, the source alleges that the real power, the control, remained consolidated in the hands of the same private banking families.
And it focuses on the U.S. system, too, the Federal Reserve.
Oh, heavily. The U.S. Federal Reserve System, established in 1913, is a major focus. The source claims it's not a government institution, despite how most people perceive it. It argues it's actually a collection of 12 privately owned regional banks, and that the ownership ultimately rests with a small number of dynastic families. The source suggests there might be around 300 such families globally controlling things, and it specifically claims, based on its own analysis or sources it uses, that a majority of these key banking families are either Jewish or part Jewish.
Okay, and the core of their power, the central piece of financial manipulation, according to the source. What's the trick?
The source really hammers on this. The ability to create money out of thin air, essentially from nothing, and then charge interest on it. It describes the process like this. The central bank doesn't actually lend money, it has, when a government or a commercial bank needs a loan. The central bank simply creates a credit entry on its books. It just types numbers into an account. This created credit, which costs literally nothing to produce, is then lent out and interest is charged on it. Real interest on, well, fabricated money. The source uses a quote attributed to Thomas Edison, the inventor.
On banking?
Yeah, apparently he had strong views on it. The quote used is, "If our nation can issue a dollar bond, it can issue a dollar bill. The element that makes the bond good makes the bill good also." The difference between the bond and the bill is that the bond lets the money broker collect twice the amount of the bond and an additional 20%. Whereas it costs the producer only $1, it costs the people $1.20 over and above the bond. The Federal Reserve is a breeder of panics and hard times. Edison's quote is used in the source to argue that this whole system, based on government bonds creating debt, just fattens the usurer, the lender, rather than helping the people or the nation. This control over creating credit, this financial chicanery, as the source explicitly calls it, is presented as being at the absolute heart of what plagues humanity. And it's the primary means by which this alleged banking clique is supposedly able to progressively buy the world's wealth, translating abstract financial power into real ownership, real control over industries, land, everything.
Right. So, according to the source, this financial power directly enables political power. It lets them manipulate, maybe even install governments.
Absolutely. That's a central and frankly chilling claim within the source's narrative. The source claims this group operates by basically subverting legitimate political processes, replacing genuine rulers with what it dismissively calls caricatures of a government. It uses a, quote, it attributes to some kind of master plan document, allegedly stating they achieve this by a president taken from the mob, from the midst of our puppet creatures. The implication is stark. Leaders aren't chosen by the people, they're selected and controlled by this hidden elite, pulled from a pool of their compliant agents or puppets.
Puppets controlled how, though? Just by money?
Not just money, according to the source. It alleges many leaders are kept in line through far more sinister means: blackmail. It claims this blackmail often involves forcing them to participate in, or documenting their participation in, horrifying occult rituals including human sacrifices, sexual orgies, pedophilia, rape, torture, and murder. This is presented as a systematic method, a way to compromise individuals at the very highest levels, ensuring their obedience through the constant threat of exposure for truly unspeakable acts.
That's an incredibly intense and disturbing allegation about how control is maintained. And the source gets specific, doesn't it? It goes into U.S. history, mentions a pattern of alleged assassinations, listing presidents like William Henry Harrison, Zachary Taylor, Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and it suggests Illuminati doctors played a role, like deliberately ensuring they died after being shot.
Yes, the source makes that specific dark claim about presidents who were shot, like Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley. It suggests doctors affiliated with this group deliberately mismanaged their care to ensure they died. And it claims that subsequent presidents, like Teddy Roosevelt and FDR, and powerful figures like J. Edgar Hoover, were initiated into high Masonic degrees, or elite secret societies like Yale's Skull and Bones, or the Mystic Crew of Comus in New Orleans. The source implies this wasn't just about honor or networking, it was about bringing them into the fold, ensuring their complicity, or putting them under the control of this group. It presents a view of U.S. history, particularly from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as being progressively hijacked, brought under this alleged Illuminati Rothschild control.
A hidden history, basically.
A very hidden and very dark one, according to this text. It points to figures like Colonel Edward Mandell House. The source explicitly describes House as a Rothschild agent who secretly directed President Woodrow Wilson, acting as the real power behind the throne. It claims House manipulated key events, like pushing hard for the League of Nations after World War I, which the source views as an early attempt at world government. And it makes the dramatic claim that the U.S. effectively became a crown financial colony of these London-based bankers. arguing this financial control was really cemented during Teddy Roosevelt's time through things like the Federal Reserve's creation and other financial moves, basically solidifying a hidden foreign control over the nation's finances and, by extension, its destiny.
Okay, so the source lays out financial control, political control through puppets and blackmail. Once they have that, how does the source claim they manage information? Public opinion. How do they control thought itself?
Right, thought control. The source emphasizes this as a crucial, pervasive mechanism, working alongside the financial and political levers. It claims this group controls the major levers of information: media, education, and cultural institutions. It specifically points to libraries and universities endowed by wealthy families, naming the Rockefellers, Carnegies, Fords. The implication is clear. The funding source dictates the ideological output. He who pays the piper calls the tune. It alleges that journalists and professors working within these controlled institutions dutifully parrot fantasies about democracy and freedom, suggesting that what's presented to the public as independent thought or objective information is actually carefully managed propaganda, all serving the hidden agenda.
So according to this source, a lot of what we learn, what we see in the media, isn't organic or truthful. It's crafted.
According to the source, yes, absolutely crafted. It makes the explicit, bold claim that mind control laboratories run by the CIA and the Tavistock Institute dream up ways to control the population. This ties into its broader claims about mass psychological manipulation, and it gives examples of what it considers the output of this alleged mind control and social engineering. One example it gives is a psychological sterilization of the human female feminism.
Wow, okay. Framing feminism itself as a mind control operation.
Yes. It frames the feminist movement not as a grassroots movement for equality, but as a deliberately orchestrated attack on traditional gender roles and the family unit, designed specifically to weaken society for easier control. It also claims they promote degeneracy and distraction through media. It actually cites the TV show Seinfeld as an example.
Seinfeld, the show about nothing.
Exactly. The source dismisses it as a show about nothing, focused on selfishness, pettiness, self-absorption, arguing that this kind of cultural product serves the purpose of diverting public attention away from important realities and towards trivialities, keeping people occupied with fluff.
The source seems to view many big social changes we've seen over recent decades, shifts in values and norms, as part of this alleged plan. It mentions things like the rise in unwed mothers or the promotion of LGBTQ+ issues in schools. It specifically references a California law requiring positive portrayal of these topics from kindergarten through high school, and frames all this as communist-inspired social engineering. That's the term it uses, claiming it's designed deliberately to undermine traditional family structures, religious faith, national identity, making people easier to control because, in the source's words, they become stunted, love-starved, sex-obsessed, isolated individuals without strong anchors.
It frames this alleged social engineering as a direct attack on what it calls the heteronormative model, which it identifies as the foundation for society's immune system, meaning the traditional nuclear family. So destroying the traditional family is presented as weakening society's fundamental ability to resist control. Furthermore, the source makes another disturbing claim, that this group uses trauma-based programming, not just on individuals, like in covert ops stories, but on a mass scale, through orchestrated events, big public traumas.
Like what kind of events?
It lists examples: Auschwitz, Hiroshima, the Kennedy assassinations, 9/11, the prisoner abuse scandal at Abu Ghraib. It claims these are used collectively, intentionally, to shock and desensitize entire populations, to program people, essentially, to focus on sex, violence, trivia, and empty social rituals, further diverting their attention and energy away from critical thought or any potential resistance to the alleged conspiracy pulling the strings behind these events. It's a picture of deliberate psychological and social manipulation on a truly grand, terrifying scale, according to the source.
Okay, now, we have to get into this. The source delves into a very, very sensitive and controversial area. It alleges a significant and decidedly negative role for Jews and Judaism in this conspiracy. It's impossible to discuss this part without acknowledging the potential for this to be seen or used as anti-Semitic. How does the source handle this? How does it present these claims?
Yes, this is absolutely crucial, and we need to be very precise about what the source claims while acknowledging the extreme sensitivity. The source itself repeatedly attempts to make a distinction. It explicitly claims conspiracy is not a Jewish racial agenda involving all Jewish people. Instead, it specifically frames it as a Kabbalistic banker elite agenda. That's its chosen terminology. The source alleges that this elite group has harnessed That's the word it uses, harnessed organized Jewry, the movement of Zionism, and certain individuals it labels Illuminati Jews. Harness them as instruments, as tools to further their own plan. But it stresses these are tools used by the elite. It states multiple times in different ways that ordinary Jews are often the pawns. They're duped. They're used as cannon fodder by this elite. And that the vast majority of Jews would disavow this master plan if they actually knew about it.
So it tries to separate the alleged elite from the average Jewish person.
It makes that attempt, yes. It even presents examples to support this distinction. It mentions assimilated Jews who oppose Zionism, like Edwin Montagu, a British cabinet minister. The source describes him as viewing Zionism as a mischievous political creed, detrimental to Jews who wanted to be part of their home nations. It also points to Orthodox Jews who, according to the source, reject the modern state of Israel on religious grounds, remaining faithful to the Torah's interpretations. It contrasts these groups with the alleged actions of this Illuminati elite. And it also mentions Jewish critics of the actions it describes, people like Israel Shahak or Christopher John Jerkness, citing their work as internal criticism that supports its claims.
Okay, so while claiming the elite is the driver and trying to make that distinction, it still directly links the Illuminati's foundational ideology back to Jewish Kabbalah, as you mentioned earlier. That seems contradictory.
It does seem contradictory, or at least a very fine, perhaps problematic line it tries to walk. Despite the attempted distinction regarding ordinary Jews, the source repeatedly claims the Illuminati derive their core ideology, Illuminism, directly from the Jewish Kabbalah. And as we discussed, it portrays the Kabbalah negatively in this context, claiming its interpretation by this elite leads to the belief that man can usurp God and redefine truth. It identifies the Kabbalah as the specific source of the alleged cult of sex worship and the origin of the Illuminati's dot and circle symbol. And again, it contrasts this alleged Kabbalistic ideology unfavorably with Christianity, framing it as a fundamental spiritual conflict.
And it also makes some very harsh claims about the Talmud, specifically.
Yes, extremely harsh. The source includes quotes from other writers describing the Talmud in very critical terms, alleging it contains distilled hatred and discrimination against non-Jews, obscenity, delight in sadistic cruelty, and insane hatred of Christ, Christians, and every phase of Christianity. The source uses these quotes and its interpretation to claim that the Talmud itself undoubtedly contributes to anti-Semitism, suggesting that the content of the Talmud, as it portrays it, is a cause of negative sentiment towards Jews, shifting blame perhaps from the conspiracy itself. Okay.
Setting aside the alleged distinction between the elite and ordinary Jews for a moment, what specific role does the source's narrative assign to these Illuminati Jews or organized Jewry in history? What actions does it attribute to them as instruments of this alleged conspiracy? This is where it gets really detailed and controversial, right?
Extremely detailed and controversial. The source makes numerous serious claims across history. It links Jewish financiers directly to the founding of the Illuminati syndicate with Rothschild back in the 1770s. It alleges that Jewish leadership was dominant in the Bolshevik Cheka, the Soviet secret police during the revolution. It claims that Cheka was responsible for millions of deaths. As evidence for an alleged anti-Christian bias, the source asserts synagogues were spared while thousands of churches were destroyed during the revolution, citing a 1932 article from the American Hebrew to back this specific claim.
Okay, so linking them to the Bolshevik Revolution's violence. What else?
It asserts that Zionists were behind America's entry into World War I, claiming they struck a deal with Britain, used their influence to get the U.S. into the war in exchange for British support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine, the Balfour Declaration being the result. It also claims World War II's purpose, partly, was actually to save communism, citing a writer named A.K. Chesterton.
Saving communism. That seems counterintuitive to the usual narrative.
It does. The source also claims Zionism itself isn't a genuine national movement, but is controlled by the order of the Illuminati. It portrays Zionism as representing a group of powerful dynastic families united by money, marriage, and Freemasonry, which it again links to Kabbalah. And it asserts Zionism stems from what it calls the Satanic Sabbatean-Frankist movement from centuries ago, framing Zionism as the modern political expression of this alleged occult lineage.
So Zionism is just another tool for this elite.
Exactly. It alleges Zionists acted as Rothschild proxies, specifically lobbying for the Iraq War and pushing for conflict with Iran, implying they served the bankers' agenda, not necessarily Jewish or Israeli interests. It portrays Zionism as a crucial tool for what it calls the Rothschilds' one-world tyranny. And here's where it gets extremely disturbing. It claims the Holocaust was strategically used to dupe Jews into taking Palestine, presenting the establishment of Israel not as a safe haven, but as the intended capital city for this alleged global tyranny. Furthermore, it makes the deeply offensive claim that Zionists needed Jewish victims during the Holocaust, needed them to hide their own alleged role in bringing Hitler to power and instigating World War II, framing Jewish suffering as a necessary cover story for the conspiracy.
That's an extraordinarily abhorrent claim about the Holocaust.
It is. And the source doubles down with claims about alleged Zionist collaboration with Nazis during the Holocaust. It cites the Kastner-Eichmann case, the dealings between Zionist leader Rudolf Kastner and SS officer Adolf Eichmann concerning Hungarian Jews. It accuses Zionist activists, members of the Judenräten, Jewish councils under the Nazis, and Kapos, prisoner supervisors, of being, quote, more cruel than the Nazis, and of collaborating to send non-Zionist Jews to their deaths. The alleged motivation. According to the source, it was to secure what it calls biologically valuable Jewish blood for the future Israel, and also to inflate the number of victims, which it claims Zionists needed politically to justify Israel's creation. It even quotes Eichmann about his supposed dealings with Kastner.
This is just layer upon layer of shocking allegations.
Yeah.
Does it connect this to modern events too?
Yes. It alleges that the modern state of Israel uses covert aggression or false flag operations as a primary method for enacting the Illuminati plan, describing it as a policy of provocation and revenge, staging incidents to justify retaliation. It even speculates that Israel's own security forces might have facilitated some attacks on Israelis to create these pretexts. It claims that terrorism, often blamed on Muslims, actually serves the same Illuminati cause as government actions, implying it's all part of a managed conflict.
And there's that alleged interview with Harold Rosenthal.
Right. The source includes excerpts from an alleged interview with Harold Rosenthal, who was an aide to Senator Jacob Javits. This supposedly happened shortly before Rosenthal died in 1976. The source itself raises questions about the interview's full authenticity, but presents its contents as fitting the narrative. In this alleged interview, Rosenthal is quoted purportedly saying shocking things like, "Most Jews do not like to admit it, but our God is Lucifer, and we are his chosen people." And claiming Jews control the UN, calling it a trap door to the Central World concentration camp.
Okay, that's an absolutely extraordinary, shocking, and deeply troubling list of claims, all presented as factual within the source's narrative. It's just crucial to keep circling back to how the source tries to separate the actions of this alleged elite from ordinary Jews, whom it claims are also deceived and used.
It does. It makes that distinction repeatedly. It seems absolutely central to the source's attempt to frame its narrative not as racial anti-Semitism against all Jews, but as an exposure of a specific, hidden, powerful elite group. As mentioned, it highlights examples like Edwin Montagu, the British politician who strongly opposed Zionism, viewing it as harmful to Jewish assimilation, which the source seems to favor over Zionist separation. It also emphasizes certain Orthodox Jewish groups who reject the state of Israel on religious grounds, contrasting their faithfulness to the Torah with the alleged actions of the Illuminati elite. And citing Jewish critics like Israel Shahak or Christopher John Bjerknes is presented by the source as further evidence that these critical perspectives exist within the Jewish community itself.
But then the source takes this highly controversial narrative even further. It suggests that Illuminati Jews are actually the Jews' worst enemy. That's a direct quote or paraphrase from the source.
Yes, that phrase or the sentiment is definitely present. The source alleges that some high-ranking Nazis involved in planning and implementing the Holocaust. It specifically mentions figures connected to the Wannsee Conference where the final solution was planned, allegedly had Jewish ancestry themselves and were secretly part of this larger Illuminati conspiracy. It claims these individuals sided with Luciferian German Nazis in what the source bizarrely and offensively describes as an inter-Jewish civil war and ethnic cleansing operation.
An inter-Jewish civil war during the Holocaust. What's the alleged motivation for that?
According to the source's framework, the alleged motivation was that this Illuminati faction, including those it claims had Jewish roots, orchestrated the Holocaust specifically to force non-Zionist or assimilated Jews into embracing Zionism and moving to Palestine, basically to prevent them from assimilating into Western societies and potentially disappearing as a distinct group, which, the source alleges, would thwart the elite's plans, as those plans supposedly depend on maintaining a specific Jewish identity tied to Zionism and the State of Israel.
So the source is framing the Holocaust, not just as a Nazi atrocity driven by pure racial hatred, but as an event manipulated, even co-opted, by this alleged Illuminati elite, including a faction that claims were Illuminati Jews themselves, with these specific twisted goals related to forcing Zionism and suppressing parts of the Jewish population who didn't fit their agenda.
Wow.
This This is a truly complex and incredibly controversial narrative presented in the source. The focus shifts dramatically to alleged internal manipulation, not just external persecution.
Precisely. It's a narrative that challenges conventional historical understanding in the most provocative way possible, always within the source's specific framework. It alleges a hidden hand orchestrating even the most horrific events for its own specific, long-term nefarious goals. The source emphasizes its view that the undeniable human tragedy of the Holocaust was exploited, even shaped, by this alleged elite for their political ends.
Okay. Beyond the finance, beyond the extremely controversial claims about Jewish groups and Zionism as instruments, what other broad connections and tactics does the source attribute to this alleged Illuminati cult to achieve their global control? What other tools are in their supposed toolbox?
Well, another major tool the source claims they use is Freemasonry, as a key instrument for infiltration, manipulation, and spreading their agenda worldwide. It describes a kind of two-tiered system: exoteric Freemasonry and esoteric Freemasonry. Exoteric, the outer layer, is presented as the public face, focused on charity, community, self-improvement. This is for the rubes, as the source puts it, the ordinary members in the lower degrees who don't know the real purpose. Meanwhile, esoteric Freemasonry, supposedly known only to the adepts, the initiates who reach the highest hidden ranks. That's where the true purpose is allegedly revealed, which the source claims is about conquering the world for Lucifer.
Conquering the world for Lucifer, hidden within Freemasonry.
That's the claim. The source asserts that the specific Illuminati hierarchy, the one founded by Adam Weishaupt in Bavaria, was deliberately added onto European Masonry at a big meeting, the Congress of Wilhelmsbad, in 1781. Essentially providing Weishaupt's group with a ready-made international network to infiltrate and use. It claims many prominent historical figures, including numerous U.S. founders and presidents, were Masons. And it suggests that even if these figures weren't fully aware of the highest Luciferian goals, they were still unwitting participants in a structure ultimately controlled at the top by the Illuminati.
So Freemasonry is presented as this global network for spreading influence and recruiting members, maybe without most of them even realizing the ultimate agenda.
Yes, that's exactly the claim. It alleges that Masons, through their lodges, their rituals, their hierarchical structure, end up repeating propaganda they receive from these occult powers at the top. And they disseminate this propaganda through various channels, media, education, business, without necessarily realizing the true source or the ultimate intent. The source claims that the state of mind created within the lodges, through the rituals and symbolism, which it often describes as pagan or occult, subtly alters the public mind over time without people even recognizing it as Masonic influence. It explicitly claims Freemasonry is closely associated with socialism and communism, as well as with organized crime, presenting it as this multifaceted tool for societal breakdown and control. Its primary task, according to the source, is to combat knowledge of the real world and to ignore the facts from true history, implying it actively promotes a false reality to hide the conspiracy.
And the source also makes that sweeping claim that this group doesn't just influence but actively created and controls both sides of major political conflicts, including wars and ideologies.
It does. It asserts the Illuminati elite deliberately embraces and manipulates seemingly opposing forces, a kind of Hegelian dialectic on steroids, perhaps. It specifically mentions both Jewish movements, communism and Zionism, and what it calls Aryan movements, fascism and Nazism, claiming they are all tools ultimately wielded by the same hidden hand. It claims they financed Hitler, saw him as a useful puppet. The source references documents like one titled "I Was Hitler's Boss" to support the idea that Hitler was maybe not the sharpest tool in the shed, easily manipulated by the real powers behind him. It alleges they deliberately instigated World War II. Why? Because Hitler supposedly posed a threat to their financial monopoly by daring to print his own debt-free money in Germany. The source claims this independent currency was a major threat to their revolution, meaning their long-term plan for global Illuminati control through financial debt and manipulation.
So World War II wasn't just about ideology, but about protecting a banking monopoly, according to this source.
That's a key part of its argument. And it further alleges that the Anglo-American business elite was heavily involved in financing and supporting the Nazi Third Reich through various means: direct financing, cartel links between corporations. It specifically mentions investment firms like Dillon Reed, Brown Brothers Harriman, noting Prescott Bush, George W. Bush's grandfather, was a partner there, And it points to U.S. companies like DuPont, Standard Oil, GM, ITT, having significant business links and cartel arrangements with German giants like IG Farben, which was integral to the Nazi war machine. Claiming these connections actively aided the Nazi buildup and war effort, implying a level of collusion at the highest corporate levels.
And the source ties all of this back to its central theme of financial control, right? Claiming this group orchestrates wars primarily for profit, for creating debt, and even for depopulation.
Absolutely. That's the cynical engine driving history, according to this text. It argues that major wars, like World War I, were financed by these international bankers, deliberately plunging nations into massive, unrepayable debt to them. It claims that trade, even in critical war materials, continued between the bankers' home nations and the belligerents during wartime. It cites the work of a British admiral, MWW Consett, who documented this during WWI, arguing this practice deliberately prolonged the conflicts for even greater profit for the financiers.
Profiting from both sides, essentially.
That's the allegation. It describes WWI as strategically crucial for the Illuminati for several reasons. It slaughtered a generation of Europe's best young men, depopulation and weakening nations. It established communism in Russia, creating one pole of their controlled dialectic. It established Zionism with the Balfour Declaration, creating another key element. And it led to the League of Nations, which the source sees as the first major public attempt at banker-controlled world government.
And World War II.
Yeah.
Similar alleged goals.
Yes. The source claims WWI was similarly orchestrated and achieved several key Illuminati objectives. The destruction of Germany and Japan as independent military and economic powers. The slaughter of millions more, including, as we discussed, using the Holocaust for specific ends related to Zionism and debt. Indebting the victorious nations even further through massive war financing. And critically, establishing the United Nations. The source notes the land for the UN headquarters in New York was donated by John D. Rockefeller Jr., and it claims figures like Alger Hiss and Harry Hopkins, whom it describes controversially as Soviet agents operating within the U.S. government, were involved in the UN's founding. All this, the source argues, set the stage perfectly for the Cold War, which it also views as a controlled, orchestrated conflict between two sides ultimately manipulated by the same Illuminati elite.
And the source frames the more recent War on Terror as just a continuation of this same long-standing policy, this idea of covert aggression, disguising aggression as retaliation for fake provocations.
Yes, it explicitly connects the War on Terror back to its earlier claims about Israel's alleged use of reprisals or provocation and revenge tactics. It suggests the narrative of a phony Muslim threat is deliberately manufactured and amplified, used to incite Americans and other Western populations to support and participate in wars abroad, making them unwitting oppressors serving the Illuminati plan, while remaining completely unaware of the real hidden agenda and the alleged orchestration behind the conflicts they're fighting. It presents this entire sweep of history, really from the French Revolution onwards, which it also claims was Illuminati orchestrated, all the way through modern conflicts, as following a prepared script orchestrated by this Rothschild-led banking syndicate and the Illuminati.
And the source suggests they rely on people just not believing it.
Exactly. According to the source, this group counts on their plans sounding too bizarre to be true. It explicitly states they count on that disbelief as a form of protection. People dismiss it as crazy conspiracy theory, and the plan continues unimpeded. The source points to various documents and alleged interviews as evidence, claiming they are consistent revelations of the invisible government. It mentions things like the letters from your globalist friend, the Harold Rosenthal interview. Despite authenticity questions, it finds the content consistent with the overall narrative. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which the source controversially claims is authentic and accurately describes the world, dismissing the widely accepted view of it as a forgery. The Christian Rakowski interview transcripts from the book Red Symphony. The Svali disclosures, claims from a woman alleging to be an ex-Illuminati mind control programmer, and others. It presents these as corroborating pieces of the puzzle.
Okay, so given this truly extensive and undeniably dark picture, this pervasive hidden conspiracy controlling history, finance, politics, culture, even social change, how does the source ultimately frame the nature of the struggle? What's the essence of the battle humanity faces, according to this text? Is it just political?
No, not at all. The source asserts that the essence of all this political struggle, all human conflict, all societal issues, it's actually fundamentally spiritual. It frames it as a cosmic battle between God, good, and Satan, evil, for the soul of man. That's the ultimate battlefield. It claims the Illuminati elite don't just disregard God, They actively worship Lucifer. It describes Lucifer as the light bearer, claims Kabbalists refer to him as Yahweh, God's name spelled backwards, and consider him the true God. The source alleges that this group fundamentally hates the God in you, meaning the divine spark, the inherent goodness, the conscience, the connection to universal truth and morality that it believes exists within every human being. That's what they're supposedly trying to extinguish.
And their ultimate goal then is to eliminate not just societal structures, but the very concept of God, the divine, from human consciousness and society itself.
The source suggests this is their real core purpose, to eliminate God from the world, and even to mock him. It cites Karl Marx, connecting him to the conspiracy, and points to his alleged reference to the decomposition of the absolute spirit in his work German Ideology. The source interprets this as philosophical evidence of a drive to dismantle the divine or universal truths. It makes the explicit, startling claim that communism, given its documented history of brutal persecution and mass murder of Christians wherever it gained control, is actually Satanism empowered, driven by spiritual malevolence, not just political ideology. The source suggests these atrocities, the genocides, weren't just political purges, but were actively fueled by evil powers against the positive good powers in this ongoing cosmic battle.
And this ties back to the idea you mentioned earlier, that this group actively works to annihilate the concept of objective truth itself.
Yes, the source strongly links the spiritual battle to the state of modern culture and thought. It describes contemporary society as solipsistic, meaning excessively focused inward, subjective, elevating personal feelings or my truth above all else. It claims society actively shuns universal standards of truth, justice, beauty, even common human experience are downplayed or denied. It argues this culture deliberately exalts trivia and nothingness, promoting superficiality and meaninglessness as a way to
The source even includes excerpts from the alleged hidden hand interview you mentioned, where someone, supposedly from this elite group, describes their actions. And it quotes this person claiming the Illuminati deliberately create all this negativity: war, hatred, greed, control, enslavement, genocide, torture, moral degradation, prostitution, drugs, all these things and more. And then disturbingly states this is done for your own good. How does that work?
Right. This is presented within the source's narrative as the alleged twisted justification of this elite. The claim is that they are providing necessary tools or challenges through these negative experiences. They create the darkness, allegedly. The hidden hand interlocutor supposedly claims it's not the negative events themselves that matter most, but how humans react to them. That's where the game is played. It involves the human free will choice, whether people choose negativity, fear, hatred, greed, or positivity, love, compassion, truth, in response to the crises the elite allegedly create. The source quotes this hidden hand figure stating that whichever side wins in conventional politics, which they dismiss by saying democracy is just an illusion anyway, the family wins. Meaning the Illuminati elite always wins because, according to this alleged interview, all paths, all conflicts they orchestrate ultimately lead humanity further along towards their overall blueprint for global control and spiritual transformation, in their negative sense.
Okay, given this incredibly bleak, all-encompassing portrayal, a hidden, powerful, spiritually malevolent force manipulating the entire world, does the source offer any way for individuals to resist, or even just to cope with this alleged reality? Is there any suggested path forward within this text?
It does offer a path, but interestingly, the resistance it suggests is not primarily political action or social organizing or physical fighting in the conventional sense. It frames the struggle not as a fight against external structures like governments or banks, but as an internal battle, a battle for our own mind and soul. So the suggested resistance is framed almost entirely in spiritual and internal terms, which aligns perfectly with its core assertion that the ultimate battle is spiritual between good and evil. The source suggests a path rooted in individual spiritual fortification. What does that look like? First, making God the absolute center of your consciousness. It says the best way to fight the darkness is to shine the light, implying that a strong personal connection to the divine is the ultimate defense. Second, not looking for direction from external authorities, not from politicians, not from media pundits, not even from the crowd or societal trends, but seeking guidance directly from God, from within. Third, actively defending one's own soul, being vigilant against the alleged spiritual and psychological assaults from the culture.
So it's very inward-focused.
Very much so. Fourth, seeking happiness and fulfillment within oneself, possessing one's own soul, being grounded internally rather than being attached to or seeking validation from external things, possessions, status, societal approval. It talks about discarding the attachments to the outside world. Fifth, ignoring the crowd. The source claims the masses are constantly manipulated by the Illuminati, So it advises deliberately choosing not to participate in or endorse what it calls the tunes of degenerates, meaning the trends, values, and distractions promoted by the allegedly controlled media and culture. Stand apart. And finally, embracing purity and simplicity of mind, rather than pursuing what it calls an inordinate desire after knowledge of things. This seems like a caution against getting lost in the endless complexities and potentially manipulated information of the external world, suggesting that focusing on core spiritual truths and inner clarity is more protective and effective than trying to intellectually master the entire conspiracy.
It presents this inward spiritual approach as the only real path to survival then. In a world it describes as having gone insane, a world that it claims deliberately feeds our souls sawdust, empty, meaningless, harmful distractions, actively working to degrade, distract, and deceive us.
Exactly. The source quotes the proverb, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." And within its context, it implies the necessary vision isn't political, it's not intellectual, it's a spiritual one centered on God. This is contrasted sharply with the materialistic, manipulative, and ultimately destructive vision of the alleged Illuminati. It emphasizes the importance of personal initiative, but initiative rooted in this personal spiritual foundation, as the only truly effective form of resistance against such a pervasive hidden power.
Well, we have certainly taken a deep dive today into a source that presents a very specific, highly elaborate, and, let's be honest, often deeply disturbing view of history and power, alleging this centuries-old conspiracy orchestrated by a satanic banking elite aiming to enslave humanity and wage a kind of spiritual war against God and the human soul itself.
We've really tried to unpack its claims. About the Illuminati's alleged origins, linking them to Kabbalah and bankers, their supposed control of global finance through private central banks, their manipulation of politics using puppet leaders and horrifying blackmail, their pervasive influence over media, education, culture for thought control and social engineering, and we navigated those extremely controversial assertions it makes about the roles of Illuminati Jews, Zionism, communism, fascism, Nazism, and Freemasonry, all presented as mere instruments within this overarching plan, while also noting the source's own attempts to distinguish this alleged elite from ordinary Jewish people.
And we touched on how the source frames his entire vast narrative as fundamentally a spiritual battle, God versus Satan, playing out for the soul of humanity. With the alleged Illuminati elite depicted as active worshippers of Lucifer, seeking to eliminate the divine and objective truth from the world. And the source concludes by offering a perspective on resistance that isn't about storming the barricades, but rooted in spirituality, inner purity, rejecting the external world's distractions and deceptions, all as described within the text's unique framework.
It is. It's a truly complex, intricate, and highly provocative web of allegations. It weaves together finance, religion, politics, occultism, historical events, into this single, dark, and, you have to admit, internally consistent narrative, however outlandish parts of it may sound. Understanding the claims made in this source really requires looking closely at the specific details it provides, the connections it draws, the interpretations it offers, and the unique, often shocking perspective on history it presents. Regardless of how unconventional or challenging those claims might seem, it definitely offers a view that radically challenges mainstream understandings of power and history.
Absolutely. And just to reiterate, this deep dive was entirely about examining the claims presented in this material, laying out the narrative it constructs so you, the listener, can understand what it actually says.
And it leaves us with a lot to think about, doesn't it? Perhaps most notably, that assertion the source makes near the end, that human events only make sense when we realize disciples of Satan are establishing a global regime dedicated to their evil god. And their alleged confidence that this just sounds too bizarre to be true and that they count on that disbelief.
A thought to mull over as you navigate the world.